Well, we're back with our second of four core domains that we're going to be covering over these couple episodes. And domain two is what we call a conversation, or specifically a conversation with the Holy Spirit. And that refers to everyday generosity. So, Cody, what's everyday generosity mean to you?
Everyday generosity is all about engaging back and forth in conversation with the Holy Spirit. And the purpose of giving in this way is to heighten our sensitivity to the Holy Spirit and to build our capacity to respond without hesitation. Now, the Holy Spirit is going to have an important role in all four domains, but for domain two, we're talking about those opportunities that come up on a daily basis, where the Holy Spirit extends us an invitation and we respond in that moment.
Now, the interesting thing, as you start to kind of break down everyday generosity, there's really two broad categories of everyday generosity. The first is what we call everyday compassion. And this is an immediate response to everyday needs that the Spirit highlights before us. The second is everyday blessing, which is more of an overflow of joyful, infectious generosity to the lives around us, even without a tangible need.
Yeah, so let's break each of these down one at a time. Everyday compassion, like you said, is really about responding to a need that we become aware of. And the purpose of engaging in this way is to teach us to embrace interruption. We see Jesus model this so well throughout the Gospels, but I think we've both seen that interruption is an important aspect of generosity. Some really simple examples of what this might look like is you're standing in the grocery store line, the person in front of you either forgot their wallet or they seem to not have enough cash to cover their groceries, but you do. And you're standing behind them and you offer to pay for their groceries in that moment. You become aware of a need and you step in and respond right there. If you wait too long, you might miss the moment, or if you're not interruptible, you could easily miss that opportunity that the Holy Spirit's inviting you into.
Now, everyday blessing is really about this overflow of joy and generosity in the absence of some specific tangible need. There's not something we're trying to meet. It's simply generosity for generosity's sake. And the purpose of everyday blessing is that it nurtures the abundance mindset over the scarcity mindset, right? More than everyday compassion, I think everyday blessing says, hey, I can use my resources simply to be generous. There doesn't have to be a specific purpose behind this gift. I can give for the sake of giving. That kind of generosity is very inviting, infectious. People see that and they want to replicate it. They want to be a part of that and they want to be invited in. A common example you might think of that we hear frequently for this kind of generosity is leaving an abnormally large tip. That might be 50% of your bill. You've heard 100% of your bill, or just like a flat $100 on top of whatever your bill is. That's the kind of generosity that just really shakes up people's, paradigm.
And we've all heard or maybe experienced the example where you're sitting in the drive-through waiting for your coffee. You pull up to the window and find out that the person in front of you has paid for your coffee. But my wife Stephanie had a really fun idea one year when we were going to get our Christmas tree, and we went to a farm and you choose it and cut it down and all that. And the way that this particular farm did the payment is they put the tree up on top of your car or in your truck, and then you go through a drive-through and you pay on your way out. And Steph thought it would be a really fun idea to pay for the tree of the person behind us. And we had no idea who they were. I think their car was probably twice as expensive as ours. So I'm not sure if they were in need or not, but this is just a way that we can experience joy in our own generosity. So everyday compassion really communicates, I see your need. And everyday blessing says, I see your worth. And these are two ways that we can engage with everyday generosity. So let's take a look at the growth progression for domain two.
So, as we seek to grow in everyday generosity, similar to domain one, we're going to progressively move along 6 steps of how our heart is transformed. The first is what we call disconnection, and that's just being unaware of the spirit, avoiding interruptions, moving at a pace which does not have the margin to see or be aware of how the Spirit might be inviting us to step in. And that's where we start by default. Disconnection naturally leads to our second step in the progression, growing awareness. And you might recognize this from some season of life. And it's where you start to notice those nudges of the Spirit, often too late, right? Like you shared just a little bit ago. Sometimes the windows for those opportunities are pretty short, and you have to take action, when the nudge comes, or else the moment's gone. And so that's where we see this growing awareness. This is starting to see, even maybe retroactively, oh, that might have been the Spirit speaking to me there and inviting me into this kind of beautiful conversation. And even though I missed it, at least I'm starting to see. And that brings us to our third step in the progression, which is what we call selective response. So we move from disconnection to growing awareness to selective response. And that's where we start to find ourselves answering that call, when the circumstances all kind of line up. So there still might be many opportunities that we miss, but maybe it's the weekend, you have some cash in your wallet, you don't have anywhere specific you have to be, and a need pops up, right? It's much easier to say yes than when there's a little bit more constraints around our time. And so that's where we start to see a couple yeses coming through in this conversation.
From selective response, we move to intentional availability. This is where we start to structure our life in order to welcome interruptions, which does require some margin. Our fifth phase after intentional availability is reflexive compassion. And this is where we start to build a habit around giving in these circumstances. It starts to become our first impulse to step in when we see a need or when we have some extra margin. We start to focus on others rather than thinking about ourselves first. And finally, our sixth and final stage is overflowing blessing. And this is where we are proactively spreading joy and resources beyond needs that we see. So this is where we are stepping into both everyday compassion and everyday blessing on a regular basis. We've planned for it. We're identifying opportunities more easily and responding without hesitation.
And especially with those last two, the fifth step being reflexive compassion, and then the sixth being overflowing blessing, you might say, hey, we talked about these two kinds of everyday generosity, everyday compassion, everyday blessing. Does that mean everyday blessing is better than everyday compassion? And I wouldn't say that that's true. I think both change us and shape us in different ways. I think one of the differences between them is that when you think about this broader conversation of the Spirit, right? Everything we're talking about here is about growing in sensitivity to the Spirit and being able to hear despite all the distraction and noise of our lives that's going on around us, and our ability to hear and respond with compassion. You're meeting a need that's in front of you. And so it's a little easier to see those opportunities when they come because needs, by definition, are a little bit more obvious. Overflowing blessing, you're really just listening to the Spirit, right? Because there's nothing that differentiates this person in front of you from the next person or the next person. And so it really involves trusting the Spirit, even when we don't know what's going to happen on the other end of that. And we may never know what happens from that on this side of heaven. But I do think that one day we will see the other half of some of these stories.
So that covers our growth progression for Domain 2, Everyday Generosity. In our next episode, we're going to cover our third domain, which is the Great Commandment. Stay tuned.